Welcome to another episode of Awaken Your Inner Awesomeness. I am your host, Melissa Oatman from melissaoatman.com, and I am super excited about today's episode because I have with us today Dr. Tiffany Nguyen, who is a spiritual life coach and a pharmacist, quite a combination. And she is here today to talk to us about how to find more inner peace in our lives. And let me tell you, that is a topic that we can all relate to and that we probably all need to hear about. So I cannot wait to get started today. For those of you who are new to this show, welcome. Those who are returning, welcome back. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me on, Melissa.
So I can't wait to get started hearing all about how we can create more inner peace in our lives. But before you get to that, how about if you just give us a little background about who you are and how you got here, becoming a spiritual life coach and a pharmacist? That just sounds like so much. I'm so impressed by that.
So I am a full-time practicing pharmacist, and I also a spiritual life coach that I help people, mostly type A personality, high achiever, and busy professional to reconnect with their own truth. And I do that by decoding their thought patterns and tracing back all of their patterns. So how did I get to that point? I guess is I don't have any awakening, one thing happens and the next day I'm new and changed. It's more gradual. It's all started, I guess, when my journey really started when I immigrated to the US by myself when I was 16. And it was one of those dark night of the soul experience. It was pretty horrible.
Yeah.
Would not recommend for anyone to move across the globe by yourself. And then, so during that time, it was more of the, I was pretty young, and it was more of a survival mode. So I would just do whatever to cope with just these traumatic experience. It was very isolating, and I hated that. And one of my biggest fear was loneliness. So I was having that of food force. So it took me a long time, more than a decade later, when I moved to a different state, to sunny Florida, to pursue my doctorate degree in pharmacy. And I was also engaged at that time. So I got all the boxes checked, but I was not happy. I was quite miserable on the inside. And most of that is also stem from the confusion. And I cannot explain it to my family or friends because I don't know why I'm not happy. I seem like I got it all together, but I don't. And it took a very honest conversation with one of my best friends, and she was just mentioning that she wanted to have a relationship like mine, and I would just look at her like, I don't know what you're talking about. It wasn't that great. And it was taking that honesty that my best friend kind of like look at me, and I was open up and share that I hated myself and I did all this bad thing in the past and I'm waiting for karma to drop. So I feel like I had to do a lot of things to earn happiness. And by the time I feel like I achieved all my goals, I didn't feel it to happiness. It was a bust. And then that vulnerability, luckily, she responded with her own vulnerability also. So she shared her own story, which is surprisingly very similar. And even though she didn't have to immigrate to any new country, but it was very similar. And it took me quite a few more time after that, just to realize that I was too harsh on myself. If our places are swapped between me and my best friend, I would never, ever thought less of her. So that all started, that's really kickstart my inner journey, like the healing journey is all kickstart with self-forgiveness, to really recognize that whatever my view of myself is kind of distorted, And what I did in the past was more of a mistake and not who I am. So it's more of the disassociation of an actions and who I am as a person. And so that's self forgiveness, and that started the healing journey. And then after that, I realized that I have this strength to, when I talk to people in very brutal, honest way, it was quick for me, probably because I'm not involved in this situation. It was quite easier for me to trace back to see the pattern, to see where all of that come from and how they got to this place. And I was able to offer that kind of clarity. And from that clarity, that where inner peace come from, because we're not lost and we're not worrying about confusion. We're not really not sure what we're gonna do. In those limbo state where we don't know what's going on, or we don't know what to do, that makes us very anxious, and that makes us have no peace. So even when the time is hard, and even when we are suffering, if we know what we're doing this for, we know why, we know the reason, and we know what direction generally we're going in, then we have a peace of mind that we can, feel easier about.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I have to circle back and ask you, um, so what made you move to a completely new country on your own at 16? And I can only imagine what a scary and lonely time that must have been for you.
Education. It's actually very common for people in, I guess, developing country to look for education in the developed nations like Northern Europe or America to have a higher education, so to get a better life. So that's very quite common.
So I think when you talk about your best friend, you sitting down and she was admiring you, wanting your life, and you sat with her and she tells you about hers and you said, well, our stories were similar. I think that happens a lot. I think a lot of people think other people have it all together. Other people must know what they're doing. Why do they have all of the answers? And yet here I am suffering and I'm miserable and I don't really know how to get to what they have. And I think that's so interesting because a lot of people really, if you looked at what their lives were truly about, they probably aren't as happy as we think they are. But how do you work with people and with women, I'm assuming, more specifically, in finding that inner happiness and peace?
I actually work with both. Women are just more common because since women are more in touch with our feeling and our emotions,
Yeah.
and we are also more intuitive. So it's just so much easier. Like women have kind of start out kind of more intuitive and kind of like more aware, so more advanced in that part. So that's why it's so much easier for women. Also, I have personal living experience as a woman, so it's just have understand so much of the struggle, so it's so much easier. So I work by tracing the pattern starting with relationship. So because we show in our career, we tend to have this professional role, so we don't tend to exhibit all of our weird side out. But in our relationship, inevitably, we're gonna show a lot of side of us, when we're in bad mood or when we're sick or when we're not our best. So that show a lot of part of us, and that show up with a lot of our behaviors, how we react to certain things and crises and challenges. So I trace the patterns by relationship. So starting with the most intimate relationship, tracing the pattern, like why people do the way they do, why they think that way, tracing to their original thought. What make they act that way? What make they think that way? And then so it's expanded out to their family because we all develop that kind of belief somewhere, and usually it stems from childhood and
Yeah.
environment, and things happen quite early on in our life, and then the ultimate goal is basically tracing back to our relationship with ourselves, how we view ourselves, how we view the world, and what our wishes are and our strengths and weaknesses. So that's the bulk of what I do.
Very interesting. And so do you tend to see a certain pattern of thoughts in people that tends to keep them feeling lost or stuck where they are?
Yes. So a very common pattern that almost everybody had, including myself, was low self-worth. Like we don't regard ourselves very highly. We think we ourselves very low. There's almost like very low self-esteem, and also especially for women, there are a lot of shame. I think women have too many double standards in every single aspect of our life.
Mhm.
So there's no way to please all kind of standard because it's double standard. So by definition, it's impossible to satisfy.
Yeah.
But then we take that kind of failure upon ourselves and we develop a lot of shames and guilt around it. And so that's very common for women, for shames and guilt. But for everybody else, gender, both gender, suffer very severely of low self-worth.
Yeah. So how do you work with someone to help them if they have self-worth issues or if they have the issue of carrying a lot of shame with them?
So they have to, like, starting out to work with me, they need to have a certain level of self-awareness. I cannot work with people who aren't very in touch with the emotion or are not open and ready to share and to actually do the work. It's like, and also if someone that already actively in like a traumatic experience, like if they're in crisis, um, I cannot work. They need like professional help, like therapists and counselors and help to get out of to get out of a toxic
Yeah.
situation first. But once they kind of okay, let's say a lot of people find me after their breakup or divorce. So usually they kind of in pain and have those kind of patterns. Usually, so go with a pattern. So most people don't know why they feel that way. They just feel like there's something wrong with them. But once we kind of trace back the pattern and kind of see the reason and the kind of like the development act, like their own story of how they came to be the way they are, then there is this relief of finding like, okay, it wasn't like something like innately wrong with them. It was something that happened and just the way we respond gave them this kind of feelings. But that doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that that's what they think and what their response was. And so they give them a choice, very empowering choice to choose differently, to see it differently. And of course, it's a choice that they have to make again and again and again. But it's a practice, it takes a while for them to be traumatic. So it's going to take a little some time to heal, it's not going to be overnight.
Absolutely. You're right. I mean, it does. You've been conditioned over a long time. So to change the pattern, and it definitely, you can change it. It does take time and practice to do it continuously to become a habit. So, working with inner peace, what would you say? What are some maybe tips that you could give anyone who's out there listening who just feels like with everything going on right now and how with the pandemic and everything we're facing every single day, and maybe you're feeling very stressed out, feeling very lost, wanting to find inner peace to kind of heal that trauma that they're going through right now or inner conflict? What are some tips maybe you could share with them?
Um, it depends on the situations, but the most practical one that I think everybody can be helpful for everybody is to focus on the presence and focus on what they actually have and what they can actually do, and then go forward with that. They don't need to plan out like what 3 months from now or the action step in the next year, what they're gonna do. Sometimes it's just for today. Sometimes it's just for the next hours or for the next day. And one of the things that I find very helpful, especially during this pandemic, a lot of people become very depressed, and there's lack of motivations and energy to actually do something, and then they feel guilty about it because they weren't productive, and it would just become like a vicious cycle. So the good thing is they can have time, and the most important thing is to focus on their very present, like that very present moment, because they should know, like, once you're depressed, there are, up and down of your emotion, of your energy. It's not gonna be like at the bottom a whole day, 24 hours. Sometimes there's like an uplift, sometimes there's like a surge, and then they just dip. And so might be helpful, depend on your personality. So typically for a high achiever that I work with, I tend to tell them to have one significant task, and have to be very specific. Like, okay, I'm gonna, let's say I'm gonna write that email, or I'm gonna apply for 2 jobs for somebody, for example.
Right.
And as long as they accomplish that the next day, and that's good. The whole day is free for them to do what they do. The whole day can be, they can be wallow in the sadness or lay in bed all day. That's completely fine. So just one significant task, and then give them the space to just feel it, to let them process that kind of emotions, because they don't want to just suppress it and don't want to deal with the sadness either. It's okay to feel the sadness. The whole world is chaotic, so it's normal for us to not feeling great.
Yeah.
Because we are all interconnected, and so it's kind of normal, and just to feel that kind of sadness, as long as it doesn't too debilitating that you cannot do anything, then that's you gonna need some help. And then just focus on that present moment. Like, are you aware of what's going on? Are you aware of what you're feeling? And even though you're feeling like a hot mess, even though you're feeling like a sadness, that's okay, as long as you have that awareness, and it's good. And then just notice like what you can actually do, and just go with that baby step.
Yeah, I really like that, because I know a lot of people, when they're feeling in the stages of depression, it's overwhelming to think of a daily to-do list. So I like the idea of just being present and having one specific goal for the day, because then if you accomplish that one thing, it gives you a sense of achievement, which helps to make you feel a little bit better. Like, oh, I didn't fail because I didn't get these 10 things done on my list, but instead I had one thing on my list that I was going to do and I accomplished it. So that makes me feel better that I've gotten it done.
Yes. And I caution, especially for overachiever, don't have a goal of 3 things that I do. No, only one thing, and one very specific and small thing. Is, that one thing, shouldn't be like, let me finish the project. That should not be one thing. One thing gonna be just one action, and what one action that you're gonna do. Don't, if you have to do like 2 things, or if you have to take 3 hours, that's not one thing. That's more than one thing.
Yeah. I like the idea of slowing down, because really I think that's a big part of it too. So many of us are just go, 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 and we're so busy that it's important to be intentional about slowing down and taking your time and doing things, being present instead of just on autopilot.
Yeah, I think this is like a fun musing, but I think because we terrible at slowing down, so the pandemic and the earth are forcing us to slow down.
Right.
Because
exactly.
we're rushing, we're going nowhere but our own doom. So we are forcing to slow down.
Yeah, I think so too. I absolutely believe that. I think it definitely showed us a lot of things, that we have to come together and work together, and that we have to slow down, and that a lot of things that we thought were important really weren't that important in the grand scheme of things. So I think it caused a lot of people to focus on their health and how they're treating their bodies and how much time they're spending with their families. And so, yeah, I think even though we think of this thing as such a tragedy, and there were a lot of good things that did come out of it in that respect.
I think through the challenges, I think people hopefully can develop not only gratefulness but appreciation for what they actually do have. Like
Yeah.
if they can walk around, if they can breathe normally, and even when you're depressed, but you to have certain kind of energy to actually enough to do a job or something like that, because they can look around and they see people that got affected by long-term effect of COVID. Even
Mhm.
after they recover, they were so fatigued they couldn't do anything. So we cannot take our energy reserve, no matter how low it is, for
Yeah.
granted anymore. And also, we can appreciate the relationship that we have, because at the end of the day, it's not like we can always travel to exotic places or even
Right.
if we have a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's really about the relationship that we have in our life, because we might not have them tomorrow, or it might be changed very significantly. So it's good to appreciate the people we have in our life.
Yeah, and I think that it also pointed a lot to self-care as you were talking about. Personally, myself, I have been dealing with my mom who's battling pancreatic cancer, and she found out she had it. It was in June of last year, so a few months into the pandemic, and then we had to go through all of these medical treatments with her, and then it seemed like it was getting better, and then no, it's not, and then it just goes back and forth. And so I started personally watching a documentary, The Truth About Cancer, just to try to get some more insight into like more holistic ways she could help heal her own body. And it was really interesting because the number one thing they said was if your immune system is compromised, like that's the only way you can get cancer, because otherwise your body fights it off. So when we don't take care of ourselves, when we're not, getting rest, going for walks every now and then when we can, and doing the self-care, we're more susceptible to become sick. So I think that's another thing that this sort of pointed out to us was we need to be taking better care of ourselves.
Definitely. I think by slowing down or being forced to slow down, we have much more time to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's quite tragic if we spend all those time hating ourselves. Is maybe we should spend those time and space to getting to know ourselves.
Yeah. And I really like that you're allowing people to find inner peace through seeing how they think about themselves, because that really is the key, is your patterns of thinking and patterns of behavior that you've had. And most of us develop those when we're babies and toddlers and on up through our childhood. So it's really hard to work by yourself to change all of that, because for most of us, we don't even understand what it is that we're doing that's causing um, the reactions that we're getting to things, like why we're getting into these bad relationships, why are we in jobs where we feel stuck and we feel like we're not living in our purpose, and all of those things. So it's important, I think, to work with someone. I think that's so key, because you can try to do all the work yourself and it's hard to do because you're not always going to see what you're doing. And when you have someone who's a professional, they can say, oh yeah, it's right here, this is what you're doing, it's all of these things, and this stems from when you were a child. Like I know this, because I'm sure you see patterns that you immediately you recognize, oh yeah, I've seen this before, this stems from when something like this happened in childhood. So I think it's great that you work with people to help them go back and not only identify this is what I'm doing, because that's the one thing I always think counseling is great, but in a lot of cases, you get a lot of the identification of what's wrong and where that started, but not as much of how do you fix it? Like, how do we make that better? Which I think working with coaches, for me personally, I can't speak for everyone, but for me personally, working with coaches is what helped give me the tools to change the way that I was behaving over and over again, and to spot it easier, and say, oh yeah, that's a pattern. Okay, that's something that I always do, so I need to change my behavior and stop doing that. And I love that you're doing that to help people, because I think that was really super helpful for me.
Yeah, I think that was one of the strengths for me, especially because I'm good in science. So I already have this analytical skill. So I enjoy analyzing things. And then I also read tarot professionally. And those two skills complement each other very well. So on one side, I tell you the actions and the practical things and your patterns and stuff. But on the other side is it helped to feel more about the thing that not quite sad. Maybe use some tarot reading to like here for fun, and here
Yeah.
there's no limit on what you want to be.
Yeah, I love that too, because that's the same thing when I work with people too, and I do coaching. Is it's it is a lot of like psychology and things that I've learned over the years, but a big part of it too is intuitive, very much intuitive, and tapping into divine wisdom, and helping them see like what's best for them in the future. And so that's interesting that you use tarot as well. I love that. Do you find
I
a lot
do.
of your clients really like that when you use tarot with them?
I do use tarot toward like the end of my coaching of the program. So most people that when they already working with me, then they should have at least some interest or open for tarot reading. I don't really have time to work with someone that very against it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not the one you're looking for to work with if you're really against tarot. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people just question sometimes, or at least this is what I hear all of the time is, well, isn't tarot of the devil, or isn't this evil? And it's not. But I think there's a lot of misconception out there when it comes to that, because certain religions will say that it's wrong or it's bad or it's evil. And I've had family members of mine who will say things like that, and I'll say, well, how can it be evil or bad if you're using it for good, to help people and to give them information, and to give them wisdom and insight? So I always like to think of it in that way.
yeah, I'm not here like I'm already in my job, like trying to help people change some of their opinions about certain things already to educate. So in my spiritual coaching work, I'm not there to educate them to change the opinion. So they just really not, I'm not the one they're looking for. And I don't want to waste my time arguing with those. It's very different with my own experience. So
Yeah.
I don't want to waste time with more argument.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And I too understand what you're saying too, when you said that you only want to work with people who are ready to look at themselves and are open to looking at their own emotions and being emotionally aware, because that is super important. Because you can coach someone all day long, and if they're not willing to look at themselves and how they behave, and to do it without shame, but if they can't look at themselves and say, this is how I've been behaving, you can't fix anything, you can't change it if you won't even identify it.
yeah, because we don't live their own life, we don't walk in the shoes. So like unless they ready to open and tell, like and tell us what happened in the past, what happened to them, and what did they do, and what they actually think when they did these things,
Yeah.
then I have no way to help them. Like I cannot walk in your mind and extract those information out. You have to tell me.
Right.
So that's why that level of self-awareness and being open and honest to be ready to share, because any kind of healing journey, any kind of inner healing journey require a lot of vulnerability, and also it's not sunshine and rainbow. It's gonna be a lot of pain. There's no way around it. You just have to face it, because it's painful, painful getting the trauma and painful to heal it. So
Right.
it's just a fact. Yeah.
It is, but there's so much, I think you feel so much better after you
Yeah,
address it and heal it,
you
you know?
definitely feel a lot more relief
Yeah.
and a lot of relief. And it's like your burden, you chipped away of it bit by bit, so it get lighter, bit by bit. But yeah, I mean, don't expect miracle the next day, but
Right.
it does really help. I think it's really help.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I've noticed is in doing healing work is it's very helpful in allowing you to identify the behaviors that no longer serve you and the triggers you have so that when those things creep up again, you get a lot faster at recognizing it and changing the way that you react to something, which completely changes the outcome. I mean, it's like night and day when you realize, oh, this used to trigger me and I used to get so upset. And now it's just like, it's like, okay, that was a little bit of an
Yeah.
annoying thing, but it didn't rock my world. So,
Yeah, I think most people don't know that was the whole goal of coaching is for you to recognize your pattern and the trigger so you can choose differently the next time it happens. It's not about changing who you are and making you feel like $1 million.
yeah.
But the goal of coaching is to help them stand on their own 2 feet and really recognize their triggers and their patterns and let them know that they have a choice so they can do it differently.
Yeah, I love that because it's very much empowering. And I think a
Yes.
lot of
Yeah.
people are looking for that because a lot of us have kind of relied on everyone else. If you were a people pleaser, you look to everyone else for how you should react or how you should be instead of going within and instead of standing in your own power and your own truth. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about coaching is that it helps you discover who you truly are again and who you were meant to be.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of I think most all of my clients have always feel like improvement and all of their life having changed for the better in some respect. Some went on and actually got therapy to help them even further along, and that's have been very helpful. So I think I think if people resonate with certain kind of message and like a mentor style of teaching or anything like that, it's worth looking into it how to work with them because the sooner you do the work, the further along you're gonna be, the more advanced you're gonna be.
Yeah, and the much fuller your life can become too, you know?
Yeah.
So, besides coaching, is there any other way that you work with people, or do you have like social media? People can follow you. What all do you offer for people?
So I only do spiritual life coaching, or unless they show up at the pharmacy I work at, then they also get my counseling for medication. But yeah, that's pretty much how they get a hold of me. The only way to interact with me is go through my website, spunkyspiritualist.com. And I do have a blog that actually people can submit questions anonymously, and that will be answered on the blog. So if people, feel, I find a lot of people like it better to share without any of the information, so very anonymously, so they can be more open to share.
Sure.
So they can do that. Yeah, or I only have one social media, which is Facebook. It's under the same handle, Spunky Spiritualist. That's it. I'm not present on any other places. So I like quiet time for myself.
Well, I love the name of that, Spunky Spiritualist. I love that. So we'll have the link to your website and then to your Facebook page in the show notes if anyone wants to go there so that they can check out your blog. Or I love that you answer questions people have too, and that's a nice component that they can do it anonymously. So if anyone has questions or just wants to check it out and see maybe what other people have asked or what you're blogging about, they can go and do that. So I
Yeah,
love
that's a
that.
beautiful thing about anonymously. They cannot find
Yeah.
out who asked anything because it's completely anonymous. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I always tell my students, there's no stupid question ever. So if you are wondering about something, there's probably somebody else out there who also is thinking of the same question. So it's great that that empowers people to step forward and ask that question that they've been dying to ask, but too afraid to think they're going to look stupid.
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if anybody ever worked like even a few months in retail, you should know. There's most of the time the spiritual questions are nowhere near the level of stupidity that I encounter. So do not worry and ask away.
Yeah, there's a guy on TikTok who is a pharmacist, and he has these funny TikToks and all of the things that people say to him or ask him as a pharmacist. And I watch it and just crack up laughing because I think to myself, yeah, I think I've been behind that person in line before where they, you know, people will ask silly questions sometimes. But yeah, so that's great. So I always like to, before we end the show, ask our guests to leave our listeners with a little piece of wisdom that they can take with them for the day. So, what words of wisdom do you have for our listeners today?
So if anybody wants to start their own inner healing journey, we all should because it's necessary. We all damaged in some ways, so we should
Right.
start healing ourselves. And the most important three characteristics that I hope everybody take on is honesty, courage, and curiosity. So the honesty and courage go hand in hand because you need courage to be honest and vice versa. Also, for curiosity is very important. I hope people figure out what their joys are and be curious and be open to possibility before shutting it down. Try it for fun, and then see where it leads you.
I love that. That's an awesome piece of advice, and very, very much true that we need to be able to be honest with ourselves, to really have the courage to look at the way that we have been behaving in our relationships and in life in general. And then the curiosity to say, what would happen if I did things differently? So I love that. Beautiful piece of advice. And you're so right. Everyone is damaged. You're not going to escape life without being damaged somehow. So I love that. Just admit that we're all damaged. Nobody needs to feel ashamed or embarrassed about that. We just all are. So having the courage to admit that and seek out the help that you so richly deserve, and it's going to make you feel better. So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation and for all of those lovely nuggets of wisdom today.
Thank you, Melissa, for having me on today.
Yes, I want to thank you so much. And thank you, all of you out there who are listening. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. Please leave a positive review from wherever you're listening. And as always, if you follow me on social media, I go live Mondays on Facebook at 6:30, where I do a free card reading. If you show up for the live, I'll pull a card especially for you. And if you want to work with me, you can go to my website, melissaoatman.com. There you'll see all the ways you can work with me, or you can book a free discovery call just to see how I might best serve you. I hope you guys are having a beautiful day from wherever you're listening. Don't forget, if you like this podcast, you can also listen to it 5 days a week if you join me over on Patreon. The link is in the show notes. I am sending you guys so much love and light, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, guys.